There are places in Afghanistan where even the mountains seem to listen. Kunar province is one of them. Sharp ridgelines, narrow valleys, villages clinging to cliffs like they're afraid to fall. And in those depths, soldiers say, sound doesn't echo, it gets swallowed. Tonight, we're going into one of those valleys. In the spring of 2008, a 12-man American patrol walked into a gorge that locals called Dara-e-Sia, the Black Gorge. They were experienced. They were cautious. They were on a simple reconnaissance mission. By nightfall, every single one of them had vanished. No gunfire on the radios, no Mayday call, no bodies, no gear. Just one short transmission, a scrambled recording, and a silence that made even hardened soldiers uneasy. This is the story of the lost squad of Kunar, a disappearance whispered about in outposts and barracks, but never officially explained. I'm Captain Nightwhisper, and this time, we're following their footprints into a valley where nothing was supposed to happen. On paper, Dara-e-Sia was just another terrain feature. A narrow cut between two ridgelines, a dry riverbed running through its center, a good place to test radio coverage and map blind spots. To the villagers who lived nearby, it was something else. The interpreter later remembered the way their faces changed when the Americans pointed to that valley on the map. Joking, casual expressions turned tight. Smiles disappeared. One old man pushed the map away with the back of his hand. "The Black Gorge is bad," he said in Pashto. "The mountain there is hungry." The platoon sergeant chalked it up to superstition. Almost every region had haunted places. Caves, shrines, stretches of road people refused to walk at night. But Dara-e-Sia had a reputation that predated the Taliban, the Soviets, even the British. Goats that wandered into it didn't return. Shepherd boys went missing in weather, clear enough to see for miles. And once, decades earlier, an Afghan Mujahideen cell had disappeared there, leaving only burnt-out lanterns and a few twisted rifles in the dust. Still, the mission remained. Reconnaissance teams don't get to choose which hills the radio waves hate. 12 men were assigned. None of them had heard the stories. Not yet. Staff Sergeant Daniel Harker wasn't the kind of leader who made speeches. He was the kind who checked your gear before you stepped off and quietly fixed your straps if they were wrong. He'd grown up in Oregon pine country. Kunar's forests didn't scare him. Superstition didn't either. When the interpreter mentioned the villagers' warning, Harker shrugged. "Mountains don't eat people," he said. "Taliban do. That's who we watch for." With him were 11 men. Corporal Luis Reyes, the radio operator, always tinkering with headsets, quietly proud when he could squeeze a signal out of dead ground. Private Jacob Miller, 19, on his first deployment. He covered his nerves with constant jokes. Specialist Aaron Trent, designated marksman, calm, observant, the kind of man who saw details others missed. And 8 more, rifleman, a medic, a saw gunner, all lean from months of mountain patrols. They weren't reckless. They were tired, careful professionals used to ridgelines, ambushes, late-night mortar sirens. A valley nobody liked on a map didn't impress them. At 0600, they stepped off from the outpost, loaded down with standard kit plus extra batteries and newly issued long-range radio equipment. By then, the sun was just starting to slide between the peaks. No one knew these would be the last shadows they cast that anyone would ever see. The approach to Dara-e-Sia was steep but familiar. Loose rock, thin trails, the thin air taste that never quite leaves your throat in the high country. Harker's squad moved in a staggered column, keeping intervals, checking high ground, the usual habits of men who knew how fast a valley can turn into a kill zone. From the ridge above, the Black Gorge didn't look special, just a dark crack in the rock, a shadow line where the sun hadn't reached yet. But as they descended and the walls rose around them, the sound changed. Boots that had crunched on stone began to sound flat. Their own breathing seemed too loud. Even the usual helicopter hum in the distance faded away. "Feels like walking into a cave," Trent muttered. Reyes ran a quick radio check back to the outpost. The signal was clear. "No problem," he said. "We're fine." The squad stepped fully into Dara Essia. The line between ordinary Afghanistan and something else slid past their ankles like cold water. And for the first time, Private Miller stopped joking. He realized he couldn't hear anything living. No birds, no insects, just the quiet scrape of gear and the soft thump of his own pulse. It felt, he later told a friend, like the valley was holding its breath. About a kilometer in, Harker called a short halt. The valley had narrowed into a twisting corridor. Overhead, the sky was a thin strip of pale blue. The air felt cooler than it should have at that hour. Reyes tried to raise the outpost again for a scheduled check. This time the radio answered with a strange pulsing static. Not the usual hiss of bad reception. This was rhythmic, almost breathing. He tapped the side of the handset, frowned, switched frequencies, tried again. Same pulsing interference, like someone exhaling directly into the signal. "Reyes, problem?" Harker asked. "Might just be the terrain, Sergeant. I'll log it." Miller tried to lighten the mood. "Maybe the mountains on the net," he joked. No one laughed, because even without the radio's strange behavior, the valley felt wrong. Trent noticed the lack of tracks first. Dry, dusty ground, perfect for retaining footprints. But aside from their own trail, nothing. No goat prints, no tire marks, no signs of recent human movement whatsoever. It was as if the valley had shrugged the rest of the world off its skin. Harker looked back at his men, then forward into the narrowing gorge. They continued deeper. By late morning, the squad should have been near the planned turnaround point, at least according to the map. But the gorge didn't seem to care about the map. The bends in the valley kept repeating, the same kink in the rock, the same dead tree leaning at the same angle, the same smooth boulder scuffed by old boots, or maybe just their imagination. Miller checked his watch. 1100. 20 minutes later, when they stopped again, he checked it once more. Still 1100. He tapped the glass, frowned, shook his wrist. "Great, my watch died," he muttered. Except Reyes, standing next to him, slowly raised his own. 1100. Trent checked his. 1100. 3 watches. 3 different brands. Same frozen time. Harker checked his as well. Unlike the others, his was an old mechanical watch, a gift from his father after basic training. The second hand ticked forward, like nothing was wrong. "My time is 11:23, he said. "Log it. Keep moving." Reyes scribbled the note in his waterproof notebook, but he hesitated before closing it, because just for a moment, the edges of the pages seemed to hum under his fingers, very softly, like something distant and patient was vibrating through the paper. Around midday, the gorge widened into a small pocket, a bowl of rock where the sky opened just enough to let sunlight spill in. It should have been a relief. Instead, everyone felt exposed. Harker used the break in the terrain to run another radio check. Reyes nodded, keyed the mic, and called back to the outpost. This time, the signal punched through. Static, then the familiar voice of their platoon sergeant. For a few precious minutes, everything felt normal. Status reports, basic jokes, confirmation of their position as best they could estimate. Then, in the middle of a sentence, Reyes stopped talking. The platoon sergeant would later say that the pause on the line was only 3 seconds long. To Reyes, it felt like he'd fallen down an elevator shaft. The sunlight dimmed, the edges of the world blurred. Behind his eyes, something pulsed, slow, heavy, older than language. He thought he heard a voice, not with his ears, inside his bones. Just one question: do you hear it? He didn't remember pressing the transmit button, but in the outpost's radio log, the last clear message from Harker's squad is written exactly as Corporal Reyes spoke it. "Do you hear that?" No one knew what he meant. Before the sergeant could answer, the line tore itself into a wall of roaring static, then silence. What happened next, we only know from two sets of evidence: a corrupted audio file pulled from Reyes's backup handset, and the memories of the men who went looking for them. Somewhere after that last transmission, the squad moved deeper into the gorge. The rock walls drew closer together. The light thinned again. Even their own voices sounded distant, as though spoken in another room. Miller swore later, in an email he sent years after the war, under a false name, that his breath began to fog in front of his face, even though it was early spring and far above freezing. "It felt like walking into a refrigerator full of water," he wrote. "My body was there, but my head was somewhere else." Trent reported feeling watched, not from above or behind, but from the stone itself, like the entire gorge was one hollow lung, and they had walked straight into its chest. Then, without warning, the sound changed. Boots on dust, gear clinking, cloth rustling, all of it slowed. To the squad, it felt like they were trudging through molasses. To the outside world, their last few minutes left almost no trace at all. Only the backup handset recorded something. Not words, not gunfire, just a low, layered vibration. When analysts later ran it through spectrogram software, the usual clean waveforms were nowhere to be seen. Instead, the audio looked like woven threads, thousands of faint lines crossing and recrossing, as if 10 different sounds had been braided into one. One tech, reviewing the image alone in a quiet office, wrote 3 words in the margin of his report before crossing them out. "It looks alive." Back at the outpost, the day moved on without them. At first, the platoon sergeant wasn't worried. Radios failed all the time in Kunar. Valleys bent signals. Batteries died faster in the cold. It wasn't until Harker's squad missed their planned check-in and failed to appear on a distant ridgeline where they should have been visible through binoculars that concern hardened into alarm. A quick reaction force was assembled, but daylight was already bleeding out of the sky. To push into Dara Esia at night meant walking blind into a place everyone already hated on instinct, so they waited. That night, the outpost's radio room felt different. The sergeant on duty swore he heard a faint noise under the usual static. Not voices, not interference. A dull, slow rhythm, like someone breathing through a long stone throat. At 0320, one of the radio techs leaned over to adjust the gain. For half a second, every headset in the room screamed with the same crushing hum that Reyes's backup recorder had captured. Papers jumped on the desk. Coffee cups rattled. One speaker blew out entirely. Then, like a door slamming shut, the signal vanished. Outside, the mountains loomed black against a field of indifferent stars. By morning, everyone was ready to go into the gorge. None of them would forget what they found there, or what they didn't. The QRF reached the mouth of Dara Esia shortly after dawn. They expected a fight: spent casings, blast marks, blood stains, the usual signature of contact. What they found was nothing. The entry trail was clear. 12 sets of prints going in. They followed them, nervous eyes scanning the rock walls, fingers resting on triggers. A kilometer in, they saw the first strange detail. The prints didn't overlap much. No scuffing, no signs of running or struggling. It looked like the squad had walked calmly, in good order, all the way to where the gorge tightened again. There, in a patch of dust about 10 meters long, the tracks simply stopped. Not faded, not washed away. Stopped, as if the men had walked to that exact point and then stepped off an invisible ledge. No drag marks, no dropped gear, No sign of bodies being hauled away, just a blank canvas of dust beyond the last boot impressions, perfectly smooth. Then Reyes's equipment man found something on a waist-high boulder near the wall. 12 radios, stacked neatly, one on top of another, antennas aligned, cords coiled, handsets placed gently, not thrown. Every device powered off. One soldier swore later that the rock underneath them felt faintly warm, as if someone had just been sitting there. But the QRF medic, when asked, only shook his head. Warm? Maybe. Or maybe we all just wanted someone to still be there. After securing the gorge as best they could, the Americans went back to the nearest village. This time, they didn't come to ask politely. The platoon sergeant, anger and fear running side by side in his veins, demanded answers. The elders initially sat in silence. Finally, one man, the same who had pushed the map away days earlier, spoke. He wouldn't look at the soldiers. He spoke to the floor instead. The interpreter's voice shook as he translated. He says, "This has happened before." Years earlier, during the Soviet occupation, an armored patrol had tried to push through Dara-e-Siyar. One vehicle broke down inside the gorge. The rest turned back to fetch parts. When they returned, the broken vehicle was gone. No tracks showed it being towed away. No signs of explosion or fire, just bare stone where it had been. Before that, going back into the time of his grandfather's grandfather, armed men who entered the gorge sometimes never returned. He says, "The mountain does not like weapons," the interpreter murmured. He says it listens, it waits, and sometimes it calls. When asked to explain what it was, the elder finally met the soldier's eyes. There was no fear left in his face, just a tired kind of certainty. "A spirit?" he said. "A curse? A thing in the rock? I do not know. I only know that it takes those who do not respect it." Outside, the wind shifted. For the first time in days, dust blew into the mouth of the Black Gorge, like the valley exhaled. The official investigation ran for weeks. Engineers were flown in to study the terrain. Signals experts analyzed the corrupted audio from Reyes's handset. Intelligence officers combed through insurgent chatter, looking for any hint of an ambush or kidnapping. Publicly, the conclusion was simple and unsatisfying. Squad presumed KIA, likely due to enemy action in complex terrain, remains unrecovered. Privately, the reports were stranger. The audio technicians noted that the backup recording contained frequencies outside the normal human hearing range. They didn't match known equipment, vehicles, or environmental noise. One comment from a classified appendix read, "The signal behaves as if originating from multiple overlapping sources in a confined space, but no echo pattern is present. This is not consistent with sound traveling through air in an open environment." The topographical survey team noted that sections of Dara-e-Siyar seemed to distort GPS readings. Coordinates drifted. Elevations fluctuated on repeated passes. The more they measured the valley, the less certain they were about its actual shape. Eventually, Higher Command did what Higher Command often does with things that resist neat explanation. They closed the file. The gorge was quietly placed off-limits for routine patrols. The incident joined a short, uncomfortable list of unresolved operational losses. And somewhere, in a secure server no one liked to access at night, a copy of Reyes's last recording sat in digital storage, waiting. Years after the war, strange stories began to surface online. Anonymous posts on obscure forums. Late-night emails exchanged between veterans who recognized each other by unit patches and deployment dates. One user, claiming to be a former private from Harker's platoon, described waking up from the same recurring dream. He's standing alone in a narrow gorge. No squad, no radio, just dust. Somewhere deep in the rock, a slow bass note begins to rise. It isn't sound, it's pressure. His bones vibrate. Then, behind his left ear, a voice that is not a voice. Do you hear it? He always wakes up before he can answer. Another veteran, who had been on the QRF, wrote that he can't stand rooms with poor acoustics. If there's no echo, he typed, I feel like I'm back in that valley, waiting for something to open its eyes. None of them are sure what took Harker and his men. Maybe it was a hidden cave network and a well-executed abduction. Maybe it was a freak terrain trap, a rock slide that buried the evidence beyond reach. Or maybe, as the villagers believe, there are places in the world where violence builds up like static, where war leaves something behind that isn't human, something that learns to listen, to call, to take. What we know is simple. 12 men walked into Dara Esia one cool spring morning. None of them ever walked out. And somewhere in Kunar, there is still a valley where sound goes in and does not come back. Thank you for walking into the Black Gorge with me. In every war, there are operations that make it into the history books. Named battles, famous firefights, stories tied to medals and dates. And then there are the others. The patrols that vanish. The incidents no one can quite explain. The reports that end with phrases like unrecovered and unresolved and presumed. Maybe the lost squad of Kunar met a brutal, all too human fate that the terrain simply hid too well. Or maybe they crossed an invisible line in a place where sound, time, and memory don't behave the way we expect. Either way, their story tells us something about war. That for all our technology, maps and radios, there are still valleys we don't understand. Still mountains that feel older than our flags. Still moments when soldiers step into the dark, and the dark steps back. I'm Captain Nightwhisper. If you want to hear more stories from the edges of military history, where field reports end and whispered legends begin, you're welcome to stay with this channel. Until next time, stay close to the lantern light, respect the places that feel wrong, and remember, some patrols don't just get lost on the map, they get lost in whatever's waiting off the edge of it.